World War II was a furnace of innovation, forging some of the most iconic weapons in history. We've all heard the legends of unstoppable tanks and colossal guns, weapons that dominated propaganda and struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. But what if I told you that many of these legendary machines were more hype than substance? Today, we're diving deep into the most overhyped weapons of the Second World War, separating the battlefield myths from the harsh realities. Get ready, because this is the story of how bigger isn't always better. Let's start with the tools designed to stop tanks in their tracks. The German Pak-43 anti-tank gun was on paper an absolute beast. It could penetrate the armor of any Allied tank from incredible distances. Propaganda films showed it as the ultimate tank killer, a guardian of the front lines. But the reality was far less glorious. The Pak-43 was incredibly heavy, weighing over 4 tons. It required a large, specialized vehicle just to move it around, making it a logistical nightmare. Once in position, it was extremely difficult to conceal because of its size, and even harder to reposition quickly if the enemy broke through. So while it could definitely knock out a tank, its immobility and sheer weight meant it was often left behind during retreats or bypassed entirely by faster-moving enemy forces. It was a powerful punch, but one that was too slow and cumbersome to land effectively when it mattered most. Now, let's talk about the tank destroyers that carried this kind of firepower. Enter the Jagdtiger. This thing was the heavyweight champion of tank destroyers, boasting the same powerful 128mm gun as the Pak-43 and armor so thick that almost nothing could get through it from the front. In propaganda, it was portrayed as an invincible fortress on tracks, a machine that could obliterate entire tank columns single-handedly. Sounds terrifying, right? The problem was, the Jagdtiger was a mechanical disaster. It was built on a modified Tiger II chassis that was already pushed to its limits. Adding even more weight with that massive gun and superstructure meant it was chronically unreliable. Engines would overheat, transmissions would fail, and it guzzled fuel at an astronomical rate, a critical issue for Germany late in the war. More Jagdtigers were abandoned by their own crews due to mechanical breakdowns or lack of fuel than were ever destroyed by the enemy. It was invincible, but only when it was actually working. Another member of this family was the Ferdinand, later renamed the Elephant. This was another monster, armed with the potent 88mm gun and wrapped in 200mm of frontal armor. It made its debut at the Battle of Kursk, where it was expected to be a game-changer. And it did destroy a lot of Soviet tanks from a distance. The fatal flaw? The initial design had no machine guns for self-defense. This made it incredibly vulnerable to infantry attacks. Soviet soldiers quickly learned they could just swarm the slow-moving giant, place explosives on its tracks or engine deck, and disable it with relative ease. Like the Jagdtiger, it was also plagued by mechanical issues and was too heavy for most bridges. Its impressive kill-to-loss ratio is often cited, but that statistic hides the fact that many were lost not in direct combat, but to breakdowns and infantry assaults, proving that even the strongest armor is useless without a well-rounded design. Moving from tank destroyers to pure siege power, we have the Sturmtiger. This was a bizarre-looking vehicle, essentially a Tiger tank chassis armed with a massive 380mm rocket-propelled mortar. It was designed to demolish buildings, bunkers, and fortified positions with a single shot. The sheer destructive power was immense, and it certainly looked intimidating. But its battlefield impact was next to zero. Only 18 were ever built. The ammunition was incredibly scarce, and the reload process was agonizingly slow, requiring a crane to load the massive projectiles. It was a highly specialized weapon with a very narrow purpose, and in the chaotic, fast-moving battles of the late war, there were very few opportunities to use it effectively. It was a sledgehammer in a world that needed scalpels. If the Sturmtiger was a sledgehammer, the Karlgert was an earthquake. These were the largest self-propelled mortar ever built, firing enormous 60-centimeter shells. They were true engineering marvels, capable of leveling entire city blocks. But they were also the definition of impractical. They were so massive and slow they had to be transported by rail, disassembled into several parts, and then painstakingly reassembled near the front line. The rate of fire was abysmal, sometimes just one shot every 10 minutes. While they saw limited action, like at the siege of Sevastopol and during the Warsaw Uprising, they were strategic oddities, not war-winning weapons. They consumed enormous resources to build and operate, all for a role that could often be performed more efficiently by heavy bombers. Now for the big cats, the legends themselves, the Panther and the Tiger. The Panther is often hailed by enthusiasts as the best all-around tank of the war, balancing mobility, armor, and firepower. And in many ways, it was a fantastic design. But its reputation is heavily inflated by its late war performance after many of its early problems were ironed out. The Panther was rushed into service for the Battle of Kursk, and the result was a catastrophe. The initial models were riddled with serious mechanical flaws. The engine was prone to catching fire, the transmission was fragile, and the final drive systems would fail after just a few dozen miles. It required extensive and complex maintenance, something the German army could ill afford. So while a fully functional Panther was a formidable opponent, getting one to the battlefield and keeping it running was a huge challenge. And then there's the Tiger. No tank in history is more famous or more feared. Its thick armor and legendary 88mm gun made it the apex predator of the battlefield. Hearing reports of a Tiger in the area was enough to cause panic among Allied crews. But the Tiger's fearsome reputation obscures its strategic failure. It was a logistical nightmare. It was ridiculously expensive and slow to produce. For every one Tiger, the Allies could build dozens of Shermans or T-34s. It was overweight, which meant it couldn't cross many bridges and often got stuck in soft ground. Its fuel consumption was colossal, and it broke down constantly. Spare parts were always in short supply. The Tiger was a tactical monster but a strategic blunder. It won battles but couldn't win the war, which was ultimately a war of production and attrition. If the Tiger was a strategic blunder, the Maus was a strategic fantasy. The Panzer VIII Maus was the heaviest tank ever built, a 188-ton behemoth that makes the Tiger look small. It was the ultimate expression of the German obsession with bigger, thicker armor and larger guns. 2 prototypes were completed, but they never saw combat. It was completely and utterly impractical. It was too heavy for any bridge, so it was designed to ford rivers by driving along the riverbed, which was a ridiculously complex idea. It guzzled fuel, was incredibly slow, and would have been an easy target for any Allied bomber. The Maus was a propaganda piece, a symbol of supposed German engineering superiority, but it had zero actual battlefield value. It was a colossal waste of resources that could have been used to build hundreds of more practical and effective tanks. The hype wasn't limited to land. Let's look at the German Navy, specifically the aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin. This was supposed to be Germany's answer to the British Royal Navy, a symbol of naval ambition. Construction started before the war, but the project was plagued by indecision and shifting priorities. The High Command couldn't agree on its purpose, the type of aircraft it should carry, or even its strategic value. The project was halted, then restarted, then halted again. The Graf Zeppelin was never finished and never saw service. It spent the entire war rusting in a harbor, a monument to misguided priorities and a navy that was trying to play catch-up without a clear strategy. Finally, we have the most famous ship of the war, the Bismarck. Its story is the stuff of legend. A mighty battleship, the pride of the German Navy, that goes on a dramatic raid and is hunted down by the entire British home fleet. The Bismarck was powerful, well-armed, and heavily armored. But its operational life lasted only 9 days. On its very first mission, a lucky torpedo hit from an ancient swordfish biplane jammed its rudder. Unable to steer, it was cornered and systematically destroyed. The Bismarck's short career highlights a fundamental weakness. It was a lone wolf without the support of a larger, well-structured naval ecosystem. Unlike the American or British navies with their carrier groups and global support networks, the Bismarck was a single, powerful piece on a board where it was hopelessly outnumbered. It was a captivating legend, but its impact on the war was minimal. So what's the lesson here? From the Jagdtiger to the Bismarck, these weapons show us that what looks good on paper or in a propaganda film doesn't always translate to victory. World War II wasn't won by the biggest, most complex, or most heavily armored machines. It was won by weapons like the American Sherman, the Soviet T-34, and the C-47 transport plane. These were weapons that were reliable, easy to maintain, and could be mass-produced in staggering numbers. They were the workhorses, not the show ponies. They were good enough to get the job done, and there were always more of them ready to go. The real story of World War II's technology isn't about wonder weapons, but about the triumph of logistics, reliability, and mass production. Thanks for watching. If you found this deep dive interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more myth-busting military history. Let me know in the comments which overhyped weapon you think is the most notorious. See you in the next one.